Today we'll continue our lesson in Chapter 11, Section 2.4, The Crusades. Go ahead, log into our Loda.usd website, and from there Clever, and from Clever Cengage Learning, and from Cengage Learning log in your student account with your password. Of course, Unit 5, Chapter 11, Section 2.4, The Crusades. And that is in pages 312 to 313. Before we do that, I want you to take a look at this summary or overview of what happened through the different crusades that were launched during the Middle Ages before we go to our lesson in our book.
The Crusades were military campaigns waged by Western European Christians during the Middle Ages for the defense and expansion of Christendom. What made a crusade distinct was that warriors involved in the fighting received spiritual merit, usually a plenary indulgence granted by the Pope. A crusade was considered by Western European Christians to be a holy act, an act of sacrifice and piety for the love of Christ. 4 centuries before the beginning of the Crusades, the first Muslim armies swept out of Arabia to conquer Palestine, Syria, Mesopotamia, Egypt, North Africa, and Spain, some 2/3 of the Christian world. Between the 7th and 11th centuries, Christians fought wars against Muslims to prevent them from making further conquests into Christian territory, or to reconquer what had already been captured. In Spain, Christian kingdoms waged wars to recapture their homeland from the Arabs, while the Byzantine Empire in the east was engaged in centuries of war with the Muslims for control of Anatolia and other regions. In the 11th century, the Seljuk Turks, recent converts to Islam, swept through Syria and Palestine. In 1071, they defeated the Byzantines at the Battle of Manzikert, conquering almost all of Anatolia. In response, Pope Urban II called the First Crusade, asking knights from all over Europe to band together and push back the Seljuks. Over the 12th and 13th centuries, the popes called more crusades to the Holy Land and also called for crusades in Spain to help push back the Muslim powers. Crusades against Muslims were not called with the intention of converting them to Christianity. Rather, they were called to regain control of territory that had been previously Christian but had fallen to Muslim armies. Jerusalem had been conquered by the Muslims in 637 and was considered particularly important to Western Christians since it was the site of Christ's crucifixion. Indeed, Jerusalem was revered as the holiest site in the Christian cosmos, and it was particularly important to Western Europeans that it be brought again under Christian rule. When in the 11th century, news arrived that Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem were being harassed and killed by the Seljuk Turks, this fact alone inspired many knights to join the First Crusade. Although the Crusades were called to reclaim lands, greed was not a primary motivation. Professor Jonathan Riley Smith, the world's foremost expert on Crusades history, has proven that crusading was incredibly dangerous and expensive, and that virtually none of the knights who went could expect to gain wealth. Indeed, they often bankrupted themselves crusading. The primary motivation for crusading was spiritual, with the knights joining because they believed that they were doing God's work by fighting to protect Christian pilgrims and to reclaim holy sites like Jerusalem, and that involving themselves in a crusade would win them spiritual merit. The Crusades to the Holy Land saw many failures but also many successes. The First Crusade and the Third Crusade, for example, were both very successful, though ultimately later, at the close of the 13th century, the last Crusader holdings in Syria and Palestine would be captured by the Muslim Mamluk Empire. However, the Crusades in Spain achieved lasting victory, with the whole of Spain being ultimately recaptured by the Christians. Later Crusades would also be called against the Ottoman Turks, such as the Crusade of Lepanto in 1571. If you want to learn more about the Crusades, subscribe to this channel, Real Crusades History. We present regular videos and podcasts on the Crusades. Thanks for watching. My new book, Why Does the Heathen Rage? A novel of the Crusades set during the reign of King Baldwin II of Jerusalem, is now available in paperback and Kindle on Amazon. Please click on the link in the About box of this video.
Well, the chapter's essential question is, how did Europe change during the Middle Ages? And the objective of this lesson is to discuss the steps Christians in Europe took to conquer Palestine and retake Spain. And by Palestine, we mean the Holy Land for three major religions: the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims. Lesson 2.4 describes the Crusades and other events that sought to make Christianity the sole religion in Europe. Well, just like what was explained a while ago, the year is 1095. Pope Urban II condemned a group of people who had invaded the lands of the Christians. The people Urban referred to were Muslims, and he called on Christians to wage war against them. Kings had regained a good bit of their authority, but the church and the Pope still had plenty of power, certainly enough for the Pope to gather armies to fight the spread of Islam. Battle for the Palestine. The Seljuk Turks conquered or seized control Jerusalem in 1071. Well, their takeover had made Christian pilgrimage to the Holy Land, also called the Palestine, almost impossible. The Holy Land includes Jerusalem and the area around the city, sites that were sacred to Christians, Jews, and Muslims. So in 1096, Christian armies set off to fight a series of wars called the Crusades to reclaim the Holy Land. Christian leaders and soldiers were motivated by the desire to protect Christians and to slow the spread of Islam. Peasants, knights, and foot soldiers joined the fight, and they achieved victory. In 1099, the army retook Jerusalem and divided the Holy Land into 4 Crusader states, but the triumph was short-lived. To cut the long story short, the Muslims reconquered the Holy Land. Soon after, a new pope launched Second Crusade, but this ended in disaster for the Europeans. A third and fourth crusades were fought as well, but these too failed. And by 1291, the Muslims had defeated the Crusaders and taken control of the Palestine, and the Crusades were over. Generally, many historians believe that the Crusades or the Crusade effort was a disaster. Now let's take a look at the Crusades that were launched from 1096 to 1204. The yellowish parts of the map are the Christian lands, and the green ones are the Muslim lands. The first crusade is the one on the purple line. It is from 1096 to 1099, and it was followed by the second crusade, obviously, the red one, from 1147 to 1149, and a third one, the blue line, from 1189 to 1191, and the fourth crusade, the brown one, from 1202 to 1204. Other crusades were not included here simply because they are less significant and less successful compared to this first crusades. Maybe not less successful, but more disastrous. Now let's take a look at the crusade from within Europe itself, the Spanish Crusade. Take note, this crusade was launched from within the European territories. So during the wars, trade between Europe and Eastern Mediterranean region greatly increased because of the greater contact between two regions. Because of the emergence of towns, feudal system declined, and the lords became less powerful, and the merchant class rose to power or increased in influence. The failures of the Crusades forced the Crusaders to refocus their frustration or redirect their frustration from within their territories. And this led to the hostility towards any non-Christians during this time. And when you say non-Christian, you are referring to anyone who is not a member of the Roman Catholic Church. So that includes, of course, the Protestants and definitely the Jews and the Muslims from within the continent. Many Jews were expelled, and a lot of them were even executed during this time. The greatest expulsion effort, however, took place on the Iberian Peninsula, which includes the present-day Spain and Portugal. And in 700s, Muslims had conquered almost the entire peninsula. When Islamic rule weakened in the year 1000, Christian kings began a long war called Reconquista. And the purpose of this is to drive the Muslims off the peninsula. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain stepped up the war. They used the power of the court known as the Inquisition to punish non-Christians. The Inquisition court ordered the torture and execution of many Muslims and Jews who would not convert or be converted to Christianity. And in 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella finally defeated and expelled the last Muslim rulers and their followers from Spain and Portugal. They also drove out about 200,000 Jews. Unlike the Crusade, the Reconquista had achieved its goal, but at the cost of many human lives. Definitely one of the darkest times in history. Now let's go to the review and assess questions. For number 1, reading check. Why did Pope Urban II encourage Christians to begin a series of wars against Muslims? And number 2, interpret maps. Which crusade involved much of Western Europe? And number 3, sequence of events. What efforts to drive Muslims from Europe were undertaken after the Crusades ended? And that is lesson 2.4 of chapter 11, the Crusades. Now go ahead, go to our Google Classroom and find the review and assess questions or review and assess assignments, chapter 11, section 2. And from there, of course, you will need to go to lesson 2.4. Go ahead, fill up the information, last name, first name, class period, date, and of course, the key vocabs inside the box on the right side of the slide. What is the title of this lesson? Go ahead, type it, and definitely the answers to the review and assess questions.